Have you ever heard of the story of Cinderella before? I thought you might have. Now, for us here in the United States, we're familiar with a version of Cinderella which goes a little something like this. We have a young girl who is horribly mistreated by her stepmother and stepsisters until one night the prince gives a ball. And with the help of Cinderella's fairy godmother and a little magic, she is able to go to the ball where she falls in love with the prince. But then at the stroke of midnight, Cinderella must hurry home before the magic fades. But the prince finds the one glass slipper she left behind. And eventually, he finds Cinderella and they live happily ever after together. But would it surprise you to know that around the world, when they tell the story of Cinderella, it's very, very different than the version I have just described here. For instance, in some countries, when they tell the story, the fairy godmother is not a lady with a magic wand. The fairy godmother is actually barnyard animals. Or would it surprise you that in some other countries, Cinderella doesn't go to the ball at all? And in some versions of the story, the prince doesn't go on a quest trying to find whosoever fits this glass slipper. The test is actually very, very different. For example, let me show you a few examples. This is the Vietnam version of the story. It's called The Golden Slipper. Now, there are actually many differences in this story, but I'm just going to point out a few. For such as in this one, the fairy godmother is not a lady with a magic wand. And can you guess which barn animal she is? It is, are you ready for it? A rooster is our fairy godmother in this story, with the additional help of a golden catfish. They work together to give Cinderella a chance to go to the celebration to meet the prince and to transform her raggedy clothes into something beautiful. And it is the rooster in particular who gives her golden slippers. Now, in this version of the story, Cinderella's slippers are not made of glass, they're made out of gold. But of course, she ends up marrying the prince at the end of the story and lives happily ever after. However, in some versions of the story, Cinderella does not go to the ball at all. For instance, let's try the Egyptian version of Cinderella. Now, in this version of Cinderella, Cinderella is actually a slave who is left behind when everyone else goes to the celebration to meet the pharaoh. And as she's crying beside the river, thinking about how much she wants to go to the celebration, a falcon appears. And this is very important in this story because the falcon symbolizes the embodiment of the Egyptian god Horus, god of the sun, who is considered one of the most powerful Egyptian gods. And the falcon picks up one of Cinderella's red slippers. Again, Cinderella does not have glass slippers in this story. They're red. And Horus, the falcon, he picks up the red slipper and flies all the way to the palace and drops the red slipper in the hand of the pharaoh. The pharaoh interprets this as a sign from the gods that whosoever fits the slipper is chosen by the gods to become his wife. And he searches and searches the kingdom, tries the shoe on every young maiden, until he finds Cinderella. And of course they are married and live happily ever after together. Now in these versions there are some similarities, such as a young girl who is not allowed to attend a celebration of sorts, and where a shoe or a slipper plays a significant part in the story. But in some versions of the story, I said this is very, very different, in which there is no ball, no celebration, and Cinderella's shoes are of no significance, in which the prince isn't even a prince or a pharaoh. Which brings us to Soot Face, which is the Native American version of the Cinderella story. And we have Soot Face, who is horribly mistreated by her sisters, suffers burns, and is forced to run around in rags. But in this version, there is no ball, no grand celebration, and the prince is actually a little bit more complicated. He is actually a warrior who has the power to turn himself invisible. And when the time comes for him to choose a wife, he decides whichever young maiden passes the test, I will become his wife. And the test consists of a young woman coming into the woods where he is waiting, invisible, and she is asked a question. If she answers honestly, he will marry her. If she lies to him, then he will reject her. And the question is, can you see him since he is invisible? And every single time he asks, every young maiden lies and says, yes, I see him. So he presses her a little bit further and asks, can you describe the bow he carries? And she's like, yes, I can. It says, it's made out of horn and pine and wood, and of course each time she lies. And so he rejects her. One by one the maidens come, they lie every time, so he rejects them, until Soot Face, or Cinderella, comes to be tested. And when she's asked, can you see him? She said, yes, I can, because he can see the good in her heart, past all of the ugliness on the surface. And when he asked, can you describe the bow? She said, yes, it is made out of the rainbow. And the string is white, white as the Milky Way, the path of souls. And she passes the test because she answered every question honestly. So he marries her. And through the goodness of his love, she is transformed into a beautiful young woman. All of her burns and scars and years of abuse fade away. She is transformed into the most beautiful woman in the land. And of course they marry and live happily ever after together. I hope you have enjoyed these different versions of Cinderella. And if you would like to read one of them, they are all available at the public library in the children's section. And for the names, we have the Golden Slipper, the Vietnam, The Egyptian Cinderella is actually in Cinderella stories from around the world, which have even more different versions of Cinderella. And the Native American is Sootface.